First of all, I'd like to recognise the contribution of some of my colleagues and co-researchers who've contributed to the research that I'll talk about today. I just want to let everyone know that we work as a team, and several people have contributed to this work. In 2019, we interviewed 9 industry leaders from contracting and clients organisations in the Australian construction industry, and we asked them what's it like working in construction. And it was really interesting, the things that people told us. They told us that there were significant cultural problems associated with working under pressure, and that resulted in mental health episodes due to job pressure in project work. And they told us that the construction industry was very masculine. It's not okay to say, I'm not okay, it's not acceptable. Take a teaspoon of concrete and harden up was the culture of the industry. And that meant that help seeking is actually very hard for people to do in that context. And these are the, I guess, background factors that make the management of mental health difficult in construction relative to other industries. But in this presentation today, I'd like to really challenge the assumptions that the construction industry is inherently stressful and think about what can be done to reduce the risk of psychological harm and make workplaces more mentally healthy for workers. This work was done some time ago. We know work hours in construction are very long, and long hours are a problem because they're linked to work stress, burnout, depression, and anxiety, almost universally in studies that have been undertaken around the world in many different industries. And over 90 years ago, the International Labour Organization established a weekly threshold of 48 hours a week to protect workers' health. More recently, a study by the Australian National University has used a large population sample of Australian workers, male, female, all different age groups, and they actually found that 39 hours a week is the point beyond which workers experience a decline in mental health. Now, if you superimpose that on this figure of the average work hours in construction, according to our research, it doesn't matter where you are. If you're on site in direct construction activity in a site office or in a company office, you're probably working above that threshold point or that tipping point. And particularly if you're on site in direct construction activity. So work hours are a problem in the construction industry. The other point to observe, though, is that working in projects isn't the same every day because projects have some particular rhythms, and they're often quite brutal rhythms, and they're often driven by project timelines. So this data here was actually collected over a 21-week period at an infrastructure construction project. And if you look at the blue line, you can see that between week 13 and week 17, that blue line rises very, very steeply. And people's work hours actually went up dramatically in that time. Now, that time actually coincided with the weeks before a major project milestone event that was to occur at week 17. At the same time as those work hours were going up dramatically during that 4-week period, people's work-life balance, their work capacity to complete tasks at home, and their satisfaction with their work-life balance, which is the orange and the yellow lines, really almost mirror image deteriorated. So what this tells us is that as work hours increase, people's work and non-work lives conflict, and that's a problem because work-life imbalance is linked to burnout and poor mental health. The thing is that what this graph does show us is that that's driven by the rhythms of project life and the way that events are programmed and resourced in projects. So there's a question mark around, could this be done better? So it's more of a flat line rather than these peaks and troughs of periods of high intensity. On that same project, we actually, in that diary data that we were collecting, people were telling us how they were working. And these were quotes that people gave us right up before that milestone event. And I'll just read the second one because it's really revealing. As usual, I have too much to do. There's not enough work hours in the day. Time flies by. You look at what you meant to achieve at the end of the day, and you end up carrying most of it over. I came into work at 4 a.m. to get ahead on work. That's a project engineer. Now, clearly that's a problem because that means that people are not allowed or able to have enough time to recover between shifts. And recovery is actually really important to health and well-being because after you expend psychological and physical energy at work, you need recovery to plenish before you go back to work the next shift. And if you don't get enough recovery, then you have to expend even greater effort to achieve the same amount of work the next day. So overall, that's not sustainable to work in those patterns for any length of time, and it's seriously a risk. So another piece of work that we did recently was look at the household income and labour dynamics in Australia data set. This is a national longitudinal study of Australian households. And what we did with this data set was we actually sorted out the construction industry workers, and then in particular manual and non-managerial construction workers. So these were blue collar, not white collar workers. And we looked at them over 15 waves of the survey between years 2005 to 2019. And we found that we looked at the adverse job conditions that they experienced and which adverse job conditions actually were significantly predictive of a deterioration in mental health. And we found that for younger workers, having low job security and an unfairness of effort and reward predicted a deterioration in mental health. But for mid-aged and older workers, not only those two adverse conditions, but high job complexity and demands and high job intensity were also predictive of deterioration of mental health. In the same study, we actually looked at the number of adverse conditions that these workers were experiencing and looked at how those adverse conditions impacted their mental health. The point in this graph is to look at the red line, which represents mid-age workers between 25 and 45 years of age. And you can see that after they experience one adverse job condition in their work, their mental health deteriorates more steeply and more dramatically than the other two age groups. So there's something going on in those mid-age workers that probably warrants more understanding and focus. We know mid-age is a complicated life period. People often have family responsibilities, mortgages, and other stressors in their lives. And certainly this shows, because as soon as they have more than one adverse job condition in their work, their mental health is likely to deteriorate. And again, just to remind you, this is actually manual, non-managerial construction workers. The same group of workers, not the same target group of workers, i.e. non-managerial or manual workers, were part of a study that we did looking at bodily pain and workability and mental health. Well, we know in construction work it's very physical, and bodily pain can start early in the career. And in fact, the study revealed that. So 29% of the workers in the survey that we conducted in their 20s experienced upper back or neck pain a couple of times a month, and 18% in their 20s said they had these things a couple of times a week. When they got into their 30s, 33% of construction workers experienced back or neck pain a couple of times a week. So they're quite young workers experiencing pain frequently. Importantly, the workers whose pain originated from work reported a significantly higher level of depression severity, and concerns about their ability to work into the future and the financial impacts were particularly stressful for them. So we know that there's a relationship between physical and mental health. But one 28-year-old scaffolder told us this story, which was really heart-wrenching. He told us that his friend passed away, he committed suicide not long ago. He had back pain, he was struggling to get back to work. When someone has an injury, they go away and they get it fixed, they have time off, they're told to come back, but maybe only 1 or 2 days a week. They're too sore to be working, but they have to be at work and they're not really doing anything, so they feel useless. It makes them a little bit more depressed. You start to get in the slump of not being active and not seeing your friends every day at work as well. And you know, this is a young worker who sadly took his own life in this situation. So it talks to the severity of these experiences. So it's important to remove psychosocial hazards from the work environment, and long hours and the stressors of working in construction projects are some of those hazards. However, it's also important to think about what sort of environment helps people to flourish. And another piece of research we've done has adopted a positive psychology approach to identifying what that might look like. And we've looked at this concept called sense of place. A sense of place describes a perception of place that connects in connection with qualities and attributes that distinguish a place from others and give it a sense of authenticity, feelings of attachment and belonging. Now, sense of place is linked to quality of life, health and well-being in broader community research, and we wondered what that might look like in a construction project. We actually identified 6 factors that we thought maybe would constitute this positive sense of place, and their community engagement, being respected at work, having good life balance, having a supportive work environment, and having a workplace that supports you to cope with the demands of your work. we've now tested that sense of place model in a construction project in New Zealand, and we used a positive measure of health and well-being, the Warwick Edinburgh Mental Wellbeing Scale, to actually look at how people experienced well-being in this project relative to these sense of place features. The Warwick Edinburgh scale does actually have population norm scores. And so what we were able to do was to break the construction workers who participated in the survey into groups of low, medium, and high well-being. And you can see low well-being are the red bars, medium, the grey bars, and high, the black bars in this graph. What we found was statistically significant differences in the mean scores of people reporting low, medium, or high well-being for all of the sense of place components except co-worker support. And what this suggests to us is that the components of sense of place could in fact provide a useful framework to help construction organizations to create project work environments that are supportive of workers' psychological health. And lastly, my colleagues and I have recently prepared a 3-part series of summary reports which look at the primary factors impacting construction workers' health and well-being. And this work that's in these reports has been undertaken over quite a long period of time. But if anybody's interested in reading these reports, they're very short. You can download them from the web or contact me and I'll be able to share them with you. Thank you.